ערב טוב לכולם, good evening. I'm so pleased to open this evening for, in the last few months we don't say I'm happy to open this evening or I'm happy to open this or that. None of us is quite happy in the last 4 months. It's a different kind of feel. So I'm pleased to open this evening. It's an important one. But first of all, welcome to the National Institutions building, in this very historic room, where the first Knesset was sworn in, and where President Weizmann, our first president, was sworn in a year later, almost a year later. This is a picture from the ceremony that took place here in this very room. It looked a little differently. We are having some thoughts about renovating the place and giving it the same flair. What we lost, by the way, the Zionist movement lost the picture of Herzl that you see here. It exists in many pictures, but the actual painting does not exist. So if you are going to somewhere in the world and you see that picture, make sure to let us know. My name is Izhar Hess. I'm the vice chairman of the World Zionist Organization, and from time to time, under the umbrella of dealing with issues of Jewish peoplehood, we are putting a spot on something that we think that is an important thing to study together. Tonight, our purpose is to study together. We are still on October 7th. Like we all know and feel, Israel did not get to October 8th yet. We'll get there. We are still in that moment of awe, of radical amazement that we still feel from that Shabbat morning of Simchat Torah. And something that we did not anticipate happened in a way that none of us could imagine. Since Zionism is such a success, something that I can say after 75 years of independence, since Zionism, since the State of Israel is such a fact, and since this dream was implemented in its ultimate way, meaning having a Jewish state in Eretz Israel, the fact that the country exists impacts each and every Jew in the world, regardless if he or she is Zionist, regardless if they are sympathetic with the idea of Zionism. It impacts every Jew in the world because it is such a fact. It is such a vivid entity that influences every Jew in the world, even if he is not connected in any way to the Jewish state. It comes with responsibility, of course, and one of the things that we saw in the weeks following October 7th is a critical increase in the level of anti-Semitism in the world, all over the world, and it affected many Jews in communities and elsewhere, but the focus was put, and I think rightly to some extent, on what's happening in the campuses. And it caught the public ear and the public eye, Jews and not Jews. And tonight we would like to take a moment to analyze this phenomena, to see how it looks, how it feels, what are the statistics that we can learn at this early stage from the things that happened. We will not be talking about the anti-Semitism events themselves, but about the impact on Jewish students in campuses, different campuses. Following the presentation of Professor Leonard Sachs of the Brandeis University, we'll have here a panel from a few people who represent different angles of the same issue or the same subject, and hopefully it will be insightful. I'm so pleased and honored to introduce my friend, Professor Leonard Sachs of Brandeis University. From your long, detailed, and so important bio, I'll just mention a few things. Professor of Contemporary Jewish Studies at the Brandeis University. Professor Sachs is a social psychologist as well as methodologist, and he heads the research, or the research is the right word, of birthright since the very beginning. Some of the most important things that I learned about birthright, I learned from him. And Professor Sachs, the floor is yours. We are so happy to have you here with us tonight.
Toda rabah, Tsar, and toda rabah to all of you for joining us this evening. I'm going to talk a bit, but I hope this will become a conversation. This is not a lecture in the formal sense. You know, when I got, I told you, Sarah, that I was going to be in Israel, and I talked about the work that we were doing and offered to do this. He said, absolutely. And then I got the flyer for this evening's event, and Kore Bekmapousim. And I said to myself, She'ela Tova, what a great question. And I'm going to give you one piece of, in the old metaphor, the elephant, about what's going on campus. And I'm going to talk about, we've since the tragedy, the inhumanity of October 7th, we have surveyed more than 7,000 young adults, anywhere from 18 to 35. I'm going to focus tonight on one group, a little over 2,000 of these Jewish young adults who are on about 50 campuses across the country. And I need to tell you why I'm going to focus on that, why this little piece of it, and how this will help the situation. So I'm an applied researcher. I want to do research which doesn't only identify a problem, but I actually want to do a tiny bit to help resolve, address the problem. And we knew, it was pretty apparent on October 8th, on October 9th, on October 10th, that something was happening on campuses and that Jewish students were adversely affected. The Jewish students, they were both very concerned about what was going on here, but then they became very concerned about what was happening to them. And the reason that I want to focus on this, and that we initially focused and reported on them, is that under the law in the United States, and we are still a country of laws, we'll find out whether we continue to be, but under the law in the United States, a university, a college, any university, any college that gets federal money, dollars from the government, cannot create a hostile environment for particular groups, and that includes ethno-religious groups, the Jews on campus. And not only that, but they can't treat that group differently than other groups. For example, African American students or Muslim students, etc. And I thought if we could document, if we could give voice to Jewish students on campus, that we would be able to make a difference. Now, why 50 campuses? So I had this crazy idea that what I was reading in the newspapers and what I was hearing and seeing online was not actually the story of what was going on. That you hear the headlines of the terrible incidents that occur at specific places, and it's part of human psychology. I'm a social psychologist. People generalize, and the assumption was that on every campus, Jewish students are in fear for their lives, Jewish students are in turmoil. And I was sure that that wasn't the case, but I'm an empiricist, so I wanted to find out. And we wanted to find out if we could identify if there are campuses where there isn't a problem, where Jewish students aren't in fear, what's different about that campus, what can we learn, what can we do with it? So that was the basis, that was the genesis of the study. And I want to make a disclaimer. American students, and you'll hear lots of it, how they are, many of them feel that they're living in a hostile environment. They're in pain. But I recognize, and I think one can't compare pain. What has happened, what happened on October 7th. I knew two of the people who were murdered on that day. Is so unspeakable and so not comparable with anything I don't want anybody to get the idea that I'm putting what's happening to young American Jews in the same plane. It is a different plane. But I also believe that you, meaning the people of Israel, need to know what's going on with Jews outside. And I spend most of my time trying to educate the Jews in the diaspora about themselves and their relationship to Israel. But this is biyachad, and in fact, to get to that, my bottom line is we have to find ways to join our communities. That one of the social psychological phenomena is called in-group solidarity. When you're under attack, you come into your small groups, and in this case, Israel is being isolated by the world, and American Jews are being isolated from other people. And the only way we're going to resolve this is to find a way. So that's my goal tonight, and I hope that we can have a conversation about what exactly we might do to make that happen. Sound like a plan? Good? Okay, so I'm from Brandis. I'm not going to give you the methodological details. You can go read that, and I've written lots about that. I'm going to start sort of in the middle of the presentation and say that what we did was interview students, dozens of students at 50 different campuses, asked them a bunch of questions about how they were experiencing their campus after 10/7. And we asked them a series of questions that ended up becoming what we called a hostility index. How hostile is my campus? And as you'll see, and I'll show that to you just in a moment, there were three key questions. Is there a hostile environment or to what extent is there a hostile environment on your campus to Jews? To what extent is there a hostile environment on your campus to Israel? To what extent are you concerned about anti-Semitism on your campus? And one of the things that we did is we then created an average score for every school. And, well, because we didn't want to write a college guide about where Jewish students should avoid going to college, we put them in groups. That top group, going to be, the top group, the most hostile schools, the highest quartile, are both what we call private universities as well as public universities, meaning state schools as well as the Ivy League and some other universities. And the bottom universities are also a collection of both public universities and private universities. The reason that is important is that the law applies in slightly different ways to these universities, and the fact that there are at both types of schools hostility or less hostility is significant. Now, one of the things, we did a study like this in 2016, and in our 2016 study, which was motivated by the fact that we were convinced that despite the fact that the headlines in the newspaper, showed, etc., were saying that every campus was on fire, that Jewish students might not be able to study in universities. Actually, shortly after this, when some other things happened in the United States, Bushi Herzog announced that Israel should prepare itself for mass aliyah from America because of the threat of anti-Semitism. And what we found, so compared to what we found in 2016, there was more anti-Semitism even at the low hostile schools than we saw then. But if you will, the high hostile schools were off the chart. And Jewish students who had actually been at many of these schools the best students, the students who felt the most comfortable at the school, the students who felt the most safe, didn't feel that way. So I'll show you some of the data. Here are the 3 questions, and the way we analyzed the study is we compared these 3 kinds of campuses. We weren't as interested in the absolute value as we were in the fact that it was different at some campuses than other campuses. And what you see here, and I'll just ask you to attend to the 4 bars in the middle of the slide, which is the question about Israel. Is there a hostile environment? To what extent is there a hostile environment on your campus toward Israel? And what you see here is that the high hostile campuses, half of the Jewish students say that the campus is hostile to Israel, and they're at the end of the scale. 60% of them, nearly 60% of them, say that anti-Semitism is rampant on their campus. Now, at one level, it's a good thing that, in terms of the question about Israel, that at the low hostile campuses, only 10% of the people are at the end of the scale. I presented this earlier today at the University of Haifa, and someone was horrified that even 10% of students on a campus were that way. So one of the things that we did was to try to document what are the experiences that are leading these people to say that their campus is hostile to Jews, to Israel, and has anti-Semitism. And here you see that more than 1/3 of the students have personally experienced insults and harassment on social media. 1/4 of them on the high hostile campus have personally experienced, meaning panim al panim, insults or harassment. Again, it's different at the low hostile schools, but there's still a significant number of people who are involved. Everyone on these campuses sees anti-Semitic images, swastikas, defaced Israeli flags, comments about Jews, and nearly 1/3, nearly 30% in the high hostile schools are, because they are Jewish, blamed for, and I'll put that in air quotes, for Israel's actions. One of the pieces of this study, and we developed this study pretty rapidly, and I remember putting these questions in right at the end, just as we were going into the field. We went into the field for the study for this particular piece of it around the middle of November. We were there before the ceasefire, we were there during the ceasefire in the field collecting data, we were there after the ceasefire, and we've analyzed the differences in that. But one of the things that I wanted to find out were, and I'll just put them all up right now, some of we call them the code words, some of the phrases that are used do the students consider, do the Jewish students, do our Jewish respondents consider them anti-Semitic? And what you see here is the first one, which is the, ADL would call it the traditional trope, that Jews are all powerful, they have too much power in the United States in particular. Everybody says, if somebody says that, they're anti-Semitic. More interesting and more relevant for what's happening now and understanding Boksim is the next two. Israel does not have a right to exist, and from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. The vast, vast majority see people expressing that as anti-Semitic. And by the way, that is the heart now of the effort on campus to deal with the situation. Some people say, the free speech advocates say, well, that's just political discourse. That's acceptable speech. The problem is, in the context of October 7th, it has a very different meaning. And one of the dynamics of what's happened on many of these campuses is that the leading group organizing protests was Students for Justice in Palestine, a group established in the United States and on campuses in 1993 as a response to the potential of the Oslo Accord and the potential of a peace agreement. And in the context of October 7th, from the perception of Jewish students on these campuses, these kinds of expressions are considered anti-Semitic. And the rub, the conflict on these campuses, on Harvard and the three presidents who appeared before Congress, the president of Penn and Harvard and MIT, is that their failure to recognize that and to recognize that the target of harassment, the target of negative stereotypical speech gets to determine whether it is harassment, whether it is improper speech, whether it is hate speech or not. And the three presidents used this word in English, context. What matters in the context? Well, the context in this case is that everything changed on October 7th. It's interesting that the question Israel is guilty of violating the human rights of the Palestinian people. Almost half say that is probably or definitely anti-Semitic. But it's not that they agree with that, let's just be clear. It's whether when they hear that from other students, they believe it's anti-Semitic or not. So it's one of the things that we're checking out. One of the problems we have is that we have no idea how many Jewish students there are at these campuses. Literally no idea. My group has done studies at a half a dozen schools, but no school wants to do that, and they've stopped collecting data in a way that would be meaningful, and when they collect data, they don't necessarily release data. The interesting thing, just to take for a random case, Harvard used to claim that a quarter of its undergraduate students were Jewish, and in fact, the Asian group that was the plaintiff in the Supreme Court case that brought down affirmative action used that as the argument that they were being discriminated against. They actually said, we are the Jews the current Jews. Right. The fact of the matter is that Harvard may no longer have even 10% of its student body, its undergraduate student body, be Jewish. And the same goes for Penn. We're looking at that, and in fact, one of the characteristics that jumps off the page of the low hostile schools is that they are schools that have large percentages of Jews. And one of the things that's hard to figure out is because they have a large number of Jews, the administration actually pays attention to Jewish students and cares very much if they're harassed, or do Jewish students just have other students to be with and they don't have to feel the social isolation that we've been able to document that they get when they're in another environment. So that's what we're trying to figure out. High hostile schools, the Jewish students fear for their lives. They feel socially isolated. Some of them went home. Some of them are hiding in their dorm rooms. Some of them won't speak up in class. They won't wear a kippah on campus. If they wear a Mogen David, they put it inside of their shirt. Now, this is not all students. This is some students. And in terms of our goal to help these schools, this is an important finding. I guess I want to, I'm going to close with this, and then we can open up to a wider discussion, and I can answer questions, share other data, and we can have a discussion of it. This week we celebrate in the United States the birthdays of both President Washington and President Lincoln. Yesterday was called President's Day. Washington's birthday is actually Yom Hamishi. And there's this extraordinary document, it's very famous, so probably many of you know about it. 1790, the United States had just been formed. They actually had a constitution, but the constitution had to be ratified by the states. One state, Rhode Island in particular, was refusing to ratify the Constitution because they were afraid that it did not protect religious liberty. Washington, they finally acceded, they ratified it, and Washington said, okay, he was doing what we now call a listening tour. He was going around the states and finding out what the people wanted the government to do. And once they ratified it, he went to Rhode Island and made a point of visiting the 25 families who were part of the Truro Bet Knesset, the Newport, Rhode Island Jewish community. And there's correspondence going back and forth. And the debate on campuses is about free speech, whether anything goes, because that's the First Amendment of our Constitution. Exactly says the government can't regulate the content of speech. It doesn't say you can say anything you want to say. And here is this statement, and I don't know, it came to me a couple weeks ago. May the children of the stock of Abraham, may, I'm a Yehudit, may we, people who dwell in this land, may we continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of other inhabitants. And then this beautiful, biblically inspired phrase, while everyone shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid. And what's going on right now is that Jews are being made to feel afraid. I don't put it up against the pain, the fear, the frustration, but also the resilience that exists here. But it is the problem, and we together, I don't think we in America are going to solve this alone. I don't think you here in Baara are going to solve this alone. This is a problem that we need to work together to resolve, and the first step is to understand what each other is going through. Tודה רבה.
The situation today have on American leadership in 15 or 20 years. We're now educating the generation that will lead the United States in 15 or 20 years. What kind of an effect the feeling is, because I must tell you, we have a daughter-in-law that teaches at NYU, and she says she's an American born, and she says she never felt so threatened in her life.
Well, that's what we're documenting here. This is a quote from the Talmudic scholar Yogi Berra. Prediction is hard, especially about the future. I have no idea what's going to happen in 15 years. What I do know, and what I do believe, is, and it's part of the contradictory way, as I interpret Judaism, we behave. First of all, we have hope, but also we recognize that we can do something about it. It is what we do that matters. And that's why I was motivated to do this work. That's why I haven't slept very much in the last 4 months, like many of you. I think there's so many threats and there's so many things on the horizon. So at the rate, I guess this is a political statement, I think the greatest threat is that Donald Trump will get reelected, and it's not even the policies of the people that part of the Republican Party that bothers me, but it's the respect for law, respect for fundamental values. If we lose that, doesn't matter how well or poorly we've trained people, and I think the implications for Israel are particularly severe. That's a personal statement. I think also that we have to, and for me this is my interpretation of Judaism and what it means to be part of Yehudit. It's that we live with contradictions. And I think in the same way, I think of this metaphor that my experience the last several days here is a little bit, it's described by the weather. All these dark clouds, you feel them. There are some rays of sunlight, some hope, lots of resilience. Then there's, these torrential rainstorms. And I think we've got both of these things going on. Even at a place like NYU, not even at a place, but as a school like NYU, there's lots of important work being done, Jewish studies work, leadership training, psychological research, sociological research, etc. And we can't let what I believe started out as a small group of people, we can't let the people who hate Jews, for whom anything that Jews, whether they use the term Jew, Zionist, whatever, do that reflects the most long-standing hatred that has existed in the world against Jews. We can't let that get in the way of our resilient intellectual and other ways. Sorry for the lengthy response.
תודה רבה. Thank you so much. And now I'm privileged to welcome our panel. בבקשה. So we are privileged here to have a very distinguished panel with us. I'd like to introduce them, and then I'll ask several questions, each one of them, and then we'll open for discussion. First, it's really an honor to have here with us Professor Bokser-Liברnט, Professor of Political and Social Science at the UNAM University in Mexico, member of the Mexican Academy of Science, distinguished visiting professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, chief editor of the Mexican Journal of Political and Social Science, and a member in several Mexican human rights organizations. תודה רבה for being with us. Then I'd like to introduce Yaana Naftalayev, the president of the World Union of Jewish Students, which is known as WUJS. There are few graduates of WUJS, as you can see, the democratic organization that represents over 800,000 students across the globe. Yaana is committed to empowering the next generation of Jewish leaders. Prior to her current position, Yaana founded and led the Jewish Student Club at the HSE University in Moscow, which soon after she won her position there, got the award of the most trendy organization on campus. She's an activist, an advocate for Jewish causes and for Israel, and just recently she made Aliyah and received a master's degree in diplomacy from the Reichman University. ברוכה הבאה וכל הכבוד. And last but not least, אופיר דיין, שלום לך, a former president of students supporting Israel in the Colombia University in New York. Diane is a research assistant at the Israel-China Policy Center at INSS that does wonderful work in the last few months. We are really very impressed from its work. Ophir is currently working on her PhD in Columbia University and in
Haifa. I got my master's and my bachelor's at Columbia.
Oh, and the PhD is from Haifa?
Yes.
Will be in Haifa. Okay, closer to our heart. Ophir is a columnist at Makor Rishon and a frequent contributor to the Israeli and American newspapers, radio stations, and TV channels. So a serious panel. I'd like to open, before I ask a question, with a statement that I'd like to put in context. We should fight anti-Semitism aggressively. This is an ugly phenomenon. We should remember that this is something that needs to be done everywhere in Israel and elsewhere. And what happened after October 7th is horrible. Period. Having said that, we are living in the best of times for the Jewish people. There are 17 million Jews in the world, 7 million Jews in Israel, 8 million Jews in North America, US and Canada together. Both communities are growing. We are living in the best of times for Jews. Anti-Semitism, compare anti-Semitism to the state of the Jews 100 years ago. So even from that level, we are experiencing wonderful times. It doesn't mean anything against the need to combat anti-Semitism as aggressively as possible, but it's also something that needs to be remembered. We are living in a different era. And we are fortunate and privileged to live in this era. So under this context, and with the fact that we know, and now heard even more, that one of the forefront of combating anti-Semitism is on campuses, I'd like to open this panel with a few questions to you, Professor Liberrand. You have an experience in teaching in universities all over the world, and especially in Mexico. Did you personally felt a change after October 7th?
Well, first of all, thank you to being invited here. I have much in common with the work of Len Sachs. In fact, today, I had the Association for Social Scientific Study of Jewry after his invitation, after he was the president. So this brings me to say, before I refer to my experience, that this is an example of crossing borders today. One of my main focus of analysis has been transnationalism. And I think that the Jewish people is a global people. There is a global Jewish system, and we are missing the opportunity sometimes to consider and look at it in a comparative perspective. So I would say that the first point is that October 7 became a watershed, I would say, for all the Jewish communities in the world, certainly for the Jewish community in the sovereign state. And I would say that talking about globality means not canceling or omitting the regional, the national, not at all. It means just looking and trying to explain how it is articulated. So I would say that today there are the share and the different and specificity. This campaign that you referred and was focused in the case that Len presented on the States, it's a phenomenon all over the campus, the campuses, plural. And it expresses itself in different terms. The United States is not Latin America. Latin America has inner differences that are really important to take into account. There is Europe with its inner differences. And I think that what we are facing today is a common threat that is organized globally. From the river to the sea, it has spread all over the world, I would say, all over the campuses. So my experience...
But in Latin America, you saw or you had the same demonstrations like we saw in Colombia or NYU?
Well, the point is about perceptions. Latin American universities has been a place where the criticism of the government of Israel, criticism of the state, criticism of Zionism and anti-Semitism have overlapped before it expressed today in the States. My argument today is that we overlook several processes that today were triggered by October 7. Mm-hmm. And these processes have to do with the political, geographical, cultural configuration at the world level, and also has to do mainly, that's the focus of my research. I've been working Israel diaspora relation, but my focus today is what happens in the hegemonic, in the dominant theoretical production, formulations in the humanities and the social sciences that pervaded universities, went out as public knowledge to society, and are part of many of the prejudices that today are. So one point, probably, I don't know, you formulated one question, I'm answering in a very integrative way, but my experience, my concrete experience doesn't reflect the situation, because exactly while this was happening in my university, which is a national university, I've been appointed in a forum that is, composed by dozens of colleagues that think differently as a distinguished professor. So at some point, what we feel as a personal aggression, that was not my case.
And the Jewish students in the same university in Mexico, they felt the same? They felt included, they felt embraced?
Well, in Mexico, most of Jewish students today, they are in private universities. And this has to be explained due to several reasons. Social composition, geographical also composition. The National University where I am is the top Latin American university in research. But Jewish students are going to private schools. But also there, we had several joint efforts with a private Jesuit university where we delivered over years a Jewish studies program that also these expressions are really of hostility. Mm-hmm. But hostility has to do today, and if we'll have some time later, and I want also to listen to my young colleagues, what I want to say is that the content of knowledge today and the blurring of borders in between knowledge and activism brought to a very difficult situation despite the will of authorities. Yeah. When you approach, and later if we'll have the opportunity, let me try to be very synthetic. Similar to the way that the paradigm of the Shoah was changed regarding the perception of Israel, the world perception after 1967, and arrived to a very critical after 1975, and et cetera, Similar to that, instead of the paradigm of a country for fighters or against fascism, etc., it became part of the decolonial and post-colonial perception of the world. Mm-hmm. So Jews were whitened. We have ceased to be a minority in many respects. Whitening the Jews meant they became part of the West, the white West that post-colonial theories are analyzing, criticizing, and recovering old prejudices of the Jewish people and of the Jews. So it
exists in Latin American university as much as it exists in the US. It's the same phenomena that you just described.
Yes, but it has different connections with union labors, you see, so it's not only students, organizations with union labors, And of course, the expression is the expression that recovers this idea of the dominant Jew, the white Jew, the money grabber Jew, right?
Yeah.
Very strong against imperialism, right? You see, there is a whole configuration there. And probably what we have to start to think, and I was listening and attending this great research you led, Len, is that it's not enough to work inside Jewish studies. We need to hold a conversation with post-colonial, with intersectionality as an approach, yeah, where women are in but not Jews. We have, with critical race studies, I mean, we need to hold, part of combating today is denouncing how these theories that opened new fields of knowledge, and we have to recognize the concept of the global south, etc., but they recover inside their formulations anti-Semite prejudices. And this is part, I think, of our challenge.
Thank you so much at this stage. באמת תודה. Thank you, תודה. Yaanan Naftalayev, the president of WUJIS. I'm so happy to ask you a few questions. You just had a gathering a few months ago, a couple of months ago, in December, in Europe, of more than 100 students. I know that you were hesitant, you were thinking to have it first in Israel, then you decided to have it in Europe. What are the reactions that you received from your people, your students coming from different campuses around the world?
So WUJIS Congress exists for 100 years. Actually, we were supposed to celebrate our anniversary. And it happens in Jerusalem for decades. And we had an amazing hotel in Jerusalem. We had it all planned. We were supposed to meet the president of Israel, and 7th of October changed everything. We realized that we cannot bring students here anymore. First of all, the flights. We have students in South Africa, we have students in Australia, all over the world. They won't be able to come. And we do represent 800,000 Jewish students. We do represent students in 40 countries. We cannot make this Congress just for 5 countries. Sure. So it wasn't an easy decision to relocate the Congress. And it wasn't an easy task as well, because we faced the challenge of safety. We realized that there is not a safe country in Europe where a group of Jewish students can gather. We were thinking about Italy, it wasn't safe. Switzerland wasn't safe. We finally found Prague as the only, and Czech Republic as the only plus minus safe country for the Jews. And the students were so thankful to us that we didn't cancel the Congress. For them, it was a meeting point. For them, it was a chance to come together, to realize that every student is facing the same problem. And it was a symbol of Jewish student resilience.
And could you feel that there is a difference between students coming from Europe, from the US, from Latin America, different kind of combating anti-Semitism?
Yes, of course. It depends from country to country. In some countries it's more far-right anti-Semitism. In some countries it's more far-left anti-Semitism. But what we know for sure is that since October 7th, the reality for every Jewish student on campus changed. It's not safe for them anymore. They're not just facing discrimination, they're facing physical danger. And in the beginning of this month, a student in Berlin ended up in a hospital because his classmate beat him up because of his support to Israel. Anti-Semites are claiming that the university campus, does not belong to Jews. And Jewish students have to fight. And it really doesn't matter if you're in the US, in Europe, in Latin America, in South Africa, in Australia. If you're a Jewish student on campus, it means you're in a constant resistance.
Do you feel that the Jewish establishment, us included, is supporting enough students around the world?
It depends what establishment we're talking about. I think that a lot of diaspora organizations became very active and started supporting students. Unfortunately, we don't see that Israel supports Jewish students so much. But I'm very happy to say that 2 weeks ago, WUJIS was invited to Knesset for a meeting with the member of Knesset Dan Luz and Moshe Turpas and Yosef Haddad. And basically what they said, that they understand that Israel isn't doing enough, what we can do to help you. And we explained to them we want to be included, we want to have a dialogue, we want you to help our students, we want you to sponsor more pro-Israeli and pro-Jewish activities on campus. So hopefully this is going to be the beginning of great work.
What is your advice to a Jewish student that had to face an incident in his or her campus? What to do? To report, to fight back, to look. What is like the guidelines that we give them?
So since October 7th, we just partnered up with International Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists, and named Brit International, in order to legally fight anti-Semitism on campus. So if you're a Jewish student and if you're facing an anti-Semitic incident on campus, you can email us, and we will make sure that a relevant lawyer in your country takes your case and makes sure that there is a punishment for someone who is an anti-Semite. So this is a very practical thing. But a non-practical thing, I think it's important to send the message to the students that the only way to fight anti-Semitism is to be proud. Is to be proud and loud and fight the fight.
We all agree, and definitely Wujus does this really remarkably. Last question, when is your next Congress?
Next Congress is in the end of December. And השנה הבאה בירושלים.
Definitely.
Yes.
It will be way better on December 24 here in Israel. For sure, we would love to have you here back. And kol hakavod for the work that you do in Wujus. Really, it's remarkable. Ophir Dayan, it's your turn. You studied in Colombia for 2 or 3 years?
5.
5 years?
Yeah.
Wow, so it's after 5 years coming back, it's not easy, I know, and getting used to back to
the easiest decision I made in my life.
After 3 years of shlichut, I remember that it wasn't
easiest move I made in my entire life. I couldn't wait to be back.
Kol hakavod, kol hakavod. It's only because her 2 parents are here, so
That's
she's
true. Well, listen, I'm an only child, and my parents are Ashkenazi, so of course they're here.
Yeah. Ophir, we all saw the things that you were able to create in Colombia, and thank you for that. Do you feel that it was more an issue of Israelis or American Jews, American students also were part of the things that you led?
Okay, so first of all, thank you all for being here. Unfortunately, I think I'm going to disappoint you with my answer. Israelis at Colombia at my time were almost uninvolved in everything pro-Israel happening on campus. I think it's important to understand the mentality of some of the Israelis who attend Ivy League universities. These are pretty affluent Israelis who arrive there, and their goal in life is to make it to Wall Street. They have no intention of coming back home. Out of 40 people, I think I'm the only one who came back. Yeah, I know. Some of them came back for reserves in the army, which is highly appreciated, but I think I'm the only one who came back to live in Israel for good.
From your entire class there? From the cohort that you
Yeah,
knew
we
there?
were 40 Israelis in all 4 years of undergrad. And I think me and one other person, like 2 of my friends who made Aliyah weren't Israeli before, but out of the Israelis, I'm the only one who came back, yeah.
Wow. Houston, we have a problem.
Yes, and I think it's important to understand, in order to address this problem, it's important to understand where it's coming from. I think these people are attending these universities with the hopes of being as American as they can. They want to date the most un-Israeli girls and eat at the most unkosher restaurants and make it to Wall Street. And I want to, connect to something you said, that it's about being proud. And we didn't do a good enough job in making being a Zionist, being an Israeli, something to be proud of. I think these people in particular, but even more broadly, Israel offers all the opportunities, almost all the opportunities that the United States has to offer today. And, people attending Colombia, I think they have very, very good reasons to come back here. They'll be in the elite of society in Israel, hopefully. and for me, it's a failure on our side to not be able to bring them back. I would say one other thing, though, that is very important to me to say, and it's not necessarily connected directly to campuses, but I think it's also important to mention the very disturbing phenomena of Israelis who move to the States to work for Israel in Israeli consulates and embassies and end up staying there. I think that's a huge issue as well. The issue that people are sent to represent Israel and then they end up staying there. I think that's an issue that Israel has to address.
It's a serious phenomena? You see it in vast numbers?
Well, let's say it this way. I had two very close friends who did that, and two of them stayed. I had two very good friends from home who moved there to work to New York, and both of them are still there.
Yes, but they worked at the consulate, or they were shlichim of the Jewish agency? What kind of capacity?
They were working on behalf of Israel.
Really?
Yes. And I think it's something that is very important to mention, because in the end of the day, if we can't retain the people who really believe in Zionism, who moved all the way across the world to promote Zionism, we have an issue. We have an issue, definitely, on that.
Although I must tell you that the numbers that we have here in the national institutions from our shlichim are not that depressing at all.
That's good.
Okay, so it's nice to know, but definitely it is a phenomenon if you evidently saw it. Ophir, the connections that you had with other colleagues, Israelis on campus, so they were not part of that organization. Jewish American students, did you find an interest with them?
So I do want to say, I think when we look at studies like this, obviously, it's a rather depressing image that comes out, and we look at the news and it's a pretty depressing image that comes out as well. But I do want to say there are hundreds and thousands of really, really brave, determined young American Jews and Israelis, and to my surprise, non-Jews who want to fight for Israel's name on college campuses. They are determined to do this to the best of their ability, even at the risk of losing some social status or feeling uncomfortable on campus. I would want to say, though, something else. Look, I know that when we look at Jews and pro-Israel students on campus, we want to say, be as loud, as proud as you can. That's not the only way to be pro-Israel on campus. I think it's super important to also empower the people who can't or won't be as loud as myself, for example. I'm a very loud person. That's just the way I am. But I had many friends who weren't as comfortable being on the front lines, and they had a lot of job to be done. And I want to mention just one of them because I think it's a really inspiring story. One of my best friends in the whole wide world is my best friend from Colombia. His Bengali students. He's Bengali, his country does not recognize Israel. On his passport it says, admissible to all countries of the world except Israel. This person was on my board for Students Supporting Israel for 4 years at Colombia. He has nothing to do with Israel. He studies physics and computer science, and he's now getting his PhD in Princeton. That's exactly the kind of people we need on our side. And he he's a very smart person and started reading and got interested with academic achievements by Israelis and came to one of our events and asked questions and just stayed. And he was one of my best advocates in Students Supporting Israel. And it's not just that he didn't want to, he couldn't expose who he was because his family is in Bangladesh, a Muslim country that would punish his family, his mother and his brother who are still there. And he was super effective without being identified with SSI. And this is something that can happen, and I think those are also people that we need to talk about. They exist.
You were in Colombia before October 7th, of course.
Yes.
You were there during the judicial reform in Israel?
No, I was there from 2017 until 2022.
Okay, so you were there when we didn't have this wave of anti-Semitism after October 7th, but Israel dealt with the more, I would say, routine challenges of hasbara.
Yes.
So one of the big issues that today, after post-October 7th, it got a different perspective, but back then for sure it was, is how Israel is dealing from a human rights perspective for the fact that it's governing more than 2 or 3 million Palestinians who do not want to be governed by Israel. That's an issue of asbara that is not connected necessarily to anti-Semitism. This criticism is something that is legit, I would imagine, in your eyes.
Yes, it's totally legitimate. Look, I am not one of the people to say that, everything contrary to the Israeli government is anti-Semitic. That's not true. I also have a lot of criticisms of the Israeli government from the right sometimes, and sometimes from the left, and that's okay. And it's totally okay.
When you do that, I give you a like.
From the right, you don't. I saw you not liking my Temple Mount tweets. Don't worry. But look, it's completely legitimate to criticize Israel, but it is important to say, look, and the great Natan Sharansky said it, when you delegitimize someone, when you dehumanize them, and when you have double standards, the 3 Ds, that's when you know it's anti-Semitic. And let me tell you how I experienced it at Colombia. It's one thing to say, this and this action in Judea and Samaria was wrong. It's not okay to say, you don't deserve a country, an independent state, because you're Jewish. Every other nation in the world, including the Palestinians, deserve a national state of their own, an independent state, but you don't. And that's anti-Semitic. And I think sometimes the people criticizing Israel, they mix this up. They say, you know what, the Palestinians deserve an independent state, but you don't. And that's double standards.
Definitely. Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove of Park Avenue Synagogue, I think in one of her sermons after October 7th, he says something that, a good quote, when you seize, and he says, as an American Jew, when you seize my right to exist, the IDF speaks for me. חתיכת משפט. חברים, we'll open now for questions and remarks from the audience, and our distinguished panelists will reply. Yes, please, at the end.
States about the Holocaust. And the person at the embassy, as he was walking me out the door, I asked him, how many years are you here? He said, I'm 4, but we're staying. And I said, I don't believe you. And he started telling me how bad and terrible Israel is. And I'm strengthening what you said. It is awful. It's a disgrace that our government hires people, and when they speak against Israel on a daily basis, they continue hiring them. And I think it's a failure of education in Israel. We have stopped educating the Israelis here that this is the Jewish state. If it's not the Jewish state, they go to Colombia and they stay in Wall Street. If it's a Jewish state, they'll come back. I was on campuses 40 years ago, and we did a lot of hasbara with Palestinians, with all kinds of different things. And I think if we're proud and we speak of what we want, regardless right-wing or left-wing, we as Jews have to understand this is the only country we have. We have to teach that to our students and on campuses.
Toda. Yes, please.
I have a question about students that we're going to see coming to Israel, hopefully in the summer with birthright or sometime after that. What changes do we in Israel, I'm coming from Anu Museum in Tel Aviv, where we talk about peoplehood, and we try to connect these students to their history, to their roots, a physical connection. When we've had students that come from birthright, their first experience with Israel is positive and fantastic. They come to Israel and they say, this is what brought my Jewish identity to me. How are these students changing or going to change? What can we anticipate when they come to Israel now after their first experience with Judaism is negativity on these campuses and the anti-Semitism that they're coming from?
The three of us want to answer, right? So I'll start because that's very important. Well, I do think that birthright brought to the light the importance of Israel for the vital and I would say vital and interconnected experience of being Jew. So it's somehow to say It's the trip to home to reinforce and enhance Jewish life in the diaspora. This has been clear, right? This has been part. So this is talking about interconnectedness, right? So that's very important. And the question today is how we guarantee that being together, and that's very important. The idea of being together, socializing together in Israel, at home, the mythical, the religious, the concrete home. And going back, this has been one of the most important, I think, achievements. Now, it is for all of us to ask today, what's going to happen when home is under this serious situation of losing, let us say, the overall control of security. That's very important. We have already very, very prominent voices talking about the failure of Zionism because Israel couldn't guarantee security. We have to read the declarations, we have to read who is signing all these declarations. So this, I think, it's a moment to think how we can work together precisely to overcome this risk of mutual estrangement. That's what I mean.
Thank you.
I'll respond shortly. Look, I think Birthright is one of the most amazing projects the Jewish people had in the last few decades. However, if I could add something to Birthright, and I think that's very, very critical, when Jewish students come to campuses, not all of them, but this is something I encountered on many occasions, is that they, even if they return from Birthright, what they saw of Israel, and by no means disrespecting, but what they saw is Masada, is the Dead Sea, it's Machne Yehuda, and they had a time of their lives, but they didn't speak about the real issues. And then when they come to campus and they faced with apartheid week and they see a huge wall and they tell them apartheid and it tell them ethnic cleansing and they're like, oh no, I saw a great jachnun in Machne Yehuda. That's not a response. And I think what needs to happen, I don't know if necessarily in Birthright, because Birthright has its own goal of enhancing closeness to Israel and to one's Jewish identity. But I think what's missing is not only speaking about Israel, and I know sometimes we don't like to hear that, but we need to speak about the fact that Israel is not perfect and teach those children, when they're not birthright age, even before that, how to face the difficult questions. And not just to their peers at universities, but to themselves. Because I saw many students who, arrived on campus and they heard apartheid and they heard ethnic cleansing and they're like, wait, someone lied to us for the last 18 years and now we went the other way and joined JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace, who, spoiler alert, they're not pro-peace. But I think it's really important to mention that, knowledge is missing. And even in a world like today, when knowledge is only like 20% and narratives are 80%, it still matters. And they still need to know the facts.
I think this answer was great.
רגע, אני רוצה מאחורה אני ראיתי שם שאלות? Yes, please.
The question is to the delegate from Mexico. The answer, as I understood, the answer of the chairman was, has the situation deteriorated in the 4 last months, and not what is the Jewry of Mexico facing. So, to my humble opinion,
would you please, would you repeat? I lost your question, sorry.
The question is, not what the Jewry of Mexico is facing now because of the 7th of October, but has in the 4 late months, has the situation of the Mexican Jewry deteriorated, declined, or not? That was the question of the chairman to my humble opinion, but perhaps you...
No, that was your question.
But it's an interesting question.
I think that we are facing a process and a phenomenon of the longue durée, how do you say, a long-lasting process. It's very difficult to answer today, 4 months after. What do I mean by that? Of course, if reading a critical media against Israel has a very strong impact. But we also have to recognize that...
On a Catholic background.
Sorry?
On top of a Catholic background.
Yeah, but you know, it's a very strange Catholic because it's a laicite and it's a laicism that the government is adhering and reinforcing together with religiosity. This is. So I do think really, regarding your question, that the perception, the negative perception of Israel and the Jewish people, both of it, is having a very negative impact all over the world, not only to the Mexican community.
And in Mexico?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
If you read the media, if you have a government that didn't condemn what happened in October 7, if you have a continent that may condemn terrorism but not define Hamas as a terrorist organization, all this has its impact. Together with this, you have a community that over the last year has been also watching and following the inner divisions and polarizations that are among Israeli society, inside Israeli society, and in the Jewish world. So here we also have elements to take into account.
Thank you. כן, בבקשה.
תודה רבה. My name is Emmanuel Rond, and I went to the United States before internet, and I produced the Israeli television in Hebrew and English, so everybody in America could watch Israeli television in America. Then, as a publicist and filmmaker, I made many films to the topic. Then I went to Germany and I produced 30 films about Shoah Letkuma and lectured all over the world about it with the bottom line Israel situation. Then later on I came back to New York and Philadelphia and went on campuses. And I realized that many of the Jewish students had very little knowledge of Jewish history, culture, religion. And then with other people, Jews and non-Jews, we're still working now on a K-12 books all over America, from elementary to the end of school.
And therefore the question is?
It's a Jewish question.
It's a lesson how to...
How can we... by saying why.
How can we, I'm a lecturer, so it's a problem. How can we also, out of Israel and in the United States, help with correcting all those books that are really became, instead of Holocaust, you have genocide, instead of Israel, you have Palestine.
So I'll put it in different words. What actually we can do from Israel, vis-a-vis books, but not only vis-a-vis books, as the place that has, the Jewish state, what we should do in order to help diaspora Jews at this time of history.
I actually wanted to answer about the books and say that I don't think that the books are the main problem now. I think TikTok is the main problem. And TikTok and Instagram and other social media, which just spreads lies in seconds. You don't even have to open and spend like an hour to read it. And of course, an easy answer to this is asbara, but I have my own answer. For example, I think that the state of Israel should put pressure on universities across the world and on the governments across the world to make sure that the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism is actually accepted. Because IHRA definition of anti-Semitism states that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. So if a university has these guidelines, which states that every time a Jewish student is attacked for supporting Israel, this incident is anti-Semitic. And this will make it easier for the university or the government to protect the victim. So, and this is like one example of what Israel can be doing. And I think that maybe diaspora needs to kind of explain to the government of Israel how to do it. And this is what Bujas is trying to do, actually.
Toda. Elami. Introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Jenny and I'm director of the Machon Madrichim. And I have a question to Yehudit, if possible. In our Machon Madrichim, we have 18 and 19 counselors from youth movements from all over the world. For Americans, we always did a course of preparation for campuses. We never did it for Latin American students. Do you think we should start doing this? And if yes, how to prepare them?
That's a long way. I'm ready to sit.
In a minute.
No, I'm ready to sit with you and talk about it. But I want just to stress, you're right, you're very right, books are not today the main source. It is TikTok and all the media. But our students in the States, in Latin America and in Europe, not only listen to the manifestation of Students for Justice in Palestine. They read and listen books in their classes all over the humanities and social sciences. And we have to address it because it's very important. The main point I would say, I think it's very strong, but I want to say, I think that today Jews and Israel are a litmus case of this attack on the West. This is what I think. We are part of this attack on the West. So this is why we are facing something that we need also to build strategic and intellectual and political alliances. And we have to know that we not only have this rejection of IRA outside Israel, but we have here also the Jerusalem Declaration that differs from that and has a very important influence. And today, when you see, for example, voices like Eva Iluz, all these voices that are so influential, we have to start working with them. This is unavoidable. Otherwise, we are omitting this separation in between the affiliated and non-affiliated, the organized and non-organized Jews. This is my opinion. We have to rethink where we and with whom we have to work.
Thank you.
I have a question for President Bujas, but nobody can answer it. The Jews in the United States and campuses are not invaded. They're living with communities. They're living with different people, and you touched it a little bit that non-Jews are feeling affiliated with Israel, are proactive in the matter, but we don't see it as active as we imagine, or maybe it's only my perspective. So, what is your perspective of Jews living in different campuses together with their own communities, and why everybody is staying silent and not being...
So let me understand, you are asking why we don't see more Jewish activism on campuses?
In the US?
Non-Jews.
No.
Of non-Jews?
With their own communities, because Jewish students, they'll live within different communities, especially around the world. They're not all Jews, right? So why don't we see that the active that we'd like to see it, people shouting things anti-Semitic?
That's a great question, and actually I also want to resonate what you were saying about maybe not always we should be proud and loud, and there are people who cannot be. And I'm going to give you a case of South Africa. And students in South Africa are now facing a lot of problems. They are now on a vacation, like the seasons are there different. But next month, they're going back to studying, and they really don't know what they're going to face there, because we know that South Africa is a bestie of Hamas. And we want to, as Bujas, we want to go there and want to support them. We want to bring like Jewish students from all over the world to show that we're here for them. But we also realize that for us to go on campus with an Israeli flag, won't do much. Like, worst case scenario will be beaten up. What is important to do is to bring Arabs or to bring pro-Palestinian activists to these campuses with us and to show that first, like if you bring Arabs from Israel to a campus in South Africa, you're showing that there is no apartheid. These people will be telling that they actually have political parties here, they actually have all the rights, and this is how you do it, and we need to do more of these things. It's not easy because it's a number games. It's not a lot of Jews in the world, it's much, you know that. But yeah, that's something that needs to be done. And interfaith dialogue is one of the WUJS's agenda, for example. We're trying to build it. Since October 7th, it's been harder to put a focus on it, but that's definitely important.
I want to also address this question, and I want to question you back. Why would they be involved? Why would they? They have nothing to do with Israel. They have no interest in doing this. And to be honest, I don't feel like we, as a collective, encourage them to be involved. And I'm gonna, probably my parents heard me give this elevator pitch like 2,000 times, but I'm gonna do it again. And the story we're telling them on campus is just not the right story, because specifically, I'll say at Colombia, which is a very, very, very liberal school, what people care about is human rights, is intersectionality, it's justice. And they don't care about high tech, they don't care about cherry tomatoes, and they definitely don't care about waste because nobody uses it in the States and it doesn't work in New York because of the high buildings. So, I wanna offer you a 30-second speech of what we should tell Jews and non-Jews, specifically non-Jews, to get them involved, or at least, you know, to listen to us. So what we need to tell them is not, you know, out of the blue. It's the true story of the Jewish people, okay? And it goes like this. The story of the Jewish people is a story of 1,000 years old native population, indigenous population in its land. And this indigenous population was kicked out by European colonizers who subjugated it for 2,000 years of brutality, of slavery, and at the height of it, of genocide. And after 2,000 years of all of this, they are the only nation on earth who managed to liberate itself, come back to its homeland, and reestablish its sovereignty in its homeland. And there is really nothing more progressive and more liberal than this story on a college campus. But this is a story we don't tell. We tell them about ways and about charity, and they're all great, and I'm not saying, and maybe at MIT they work wonderfully, I don't know. But at Columbia and in Berkeley and in places like this, they just don't work. And we need to tell our story. And I know that we're in a hurry, but I'm just gonna say one last thing. And really, I feel like I'm saying it a lot, but no disrespect. We didn't wait 2,000 years for the Azrieli Center or for Sarona, okay? We just didn't. We waited 2,000 years for Jerusalem, okay? And if we don't say
also
that...
Also for Tel Aviv. I differ.
Maybe you, I don't know.
Maybe the two universities of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, but definitely Tel Aviv.
But we're not here in Israel in order to be the startup nation. We're here in Israel to revive Jewish sovereignty in our land, and if we don't say that, we sin and we lose non-Jews, because when it's a story of national liberation, it can also be their story. And it was the story for my good friend in Colombia who's Native American, and she could totally relate to my story because that's how I told it. And I know, one last thing, really last. Look, and when you say this story, you can have any opinion you want. You can be pro 1 state, 2 state, 4 states. I'm not taking an opinion. You can believe that we need to divide Israel and give half of it to the Palestinians in order to achieve peace, but knowing that it's ours to give up. It's our decision because it's our homeland, and now we can negotiate it. I disagree, but that's a whole different issue, which really doesn't matter.
Toda. Yehudit, you wanted to say something?
I don't know, yes. I'll tell you something. Immediately I'll arrange with my 2 young colleagues a meeting for tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. We don't need. But it's very important what you are saying, but there is a periodization. because our students also are reading the new historians and the critical Zionists and have to deal with it. I mean, you're very right, there is a story, but also there is a timeline. And while we were not colonizers, never, and you have to understand exactly what was our place and role in all the imperiums, of course, all this imperial division of the Middle East. We have to know where we were. We are not the actors, we were not the conquerors, not the colonizers. But since then, we are now facing a difficult moment, and also on this we have to talk.
Yeah. We will do now a trick, okay? I'll collect a few questions, and then each one of our panelists will have a few sentences to conclude, and they will decide which question they will be addressing, okay? Yes.
My name is Odred. I'm working in the Jewish agency, studying to work with students. Israeli fellow in America, for example, we're sending 100 students. And I want each one of you to tell me a tip that you want to be our shlichim. We're sending shlichim to Mexico, we're sending shlichim to New York, sending shlichim to...
Okay, we have a tip collector here. Yes, the Chorab?
Hi, I'm Lindsay. I'm from the Anu Museum, also with Sharon. Yaaner, I think we have a Zoom scheduled for tomorrow anyway. But my question is from all accounts right now, you're all doing work to protect the Jewish community. Yaaner, you said specifically about how to give legal counsel to Jews fighting anti-Semitism. But it sounds like for a Jewish student on campus right now, it's better not to be Jewish. It sounds like a really terrible group to be a part of. So do you see a need to encourage Jews on why to be Jewish right now, not just how to protect themselves to be Jewish, to give some of that pride and joy back into their identity?
Thank you.
Yes, my question is, all this hostility and anti-Semitism, is it just spontaneous individual feelings that appear now, or is it too, or more, something organized, by maybe the Muslim Brothers and Qatar and so on, and the Arab world that are in interest to split the link between Israel and the US? It would be very dangerous for Israel.
What do you think are the tools that the Jewish student have to fight anti-Semitism and disinformation?
Yes, please.
I'm Jonathan Ariel. I'm quite knowledgeable on cognitive warfare. I was an intelligence officer in Nelson Mandela's staff, and I was an intelligence officer in the ANC during the struggle against apartheid. One question, is there enough awareness, I think there isn't, of just how much the cognitive warfare campaign against Judaism is an integral part of the cognitive campaign that Russia, especially in Iran, against the West, we are the collateral damage. Certainly as part of Russia, who's the main player. And I'm quoting here from good intelligence sources in OSINT, in the top intelligence agencies. Russia doesn't care, but it's collateral damage. It serves their need. Number two...
We said one.
Sorry?
One question,
no,
one
this
question.
Is from Mexico, because it's specific to her.
And short.
Short.
One sentence.
The fact that you come from a country where the narrative is very different from the traditional Western white, quote, narrative of the US, because Mexico is very different. The whole Mexican narrative, colonialism, is very different. I'd like your opinion on how, that fits how that can work, which you come in that more of the global south to a certain extent, or kind of bridges the two, and it's a different narrative from a traditional Eurocentric American one.
Thank you. Two last questions, really short ones. Zvira Viv.
Most of the students in America don't study in their hometowns. What kind of an attempt there is to connect them to the Jewish community where the university is, except for Hillel? Is there any attempt to connect them, because by the time they are 18 they go to university?
Great question, שליח תמיד שליח, כן. שאלה אחרונה?
I know when I say what happens the day after carries lots of context, but in this case, for the US, which is what I'm only speaking about, heading into elections at a time when a generation of kids have not had an opportunity to really learn how to hold multiple things in their head at one time, multiple truths. It goes to what you were saying about the way humanities is being taught. My research that I did right until probably September was all about deepening.
Where did you research? Where?
This was a project with a funder, with a client I had And the issue was a lot about deepening discourse in Israel, about Israel for Americans on campus, and how to process that. So a lot of what we've been speaking about is the birthright students who may not have had much of a Jewish connection before. But I'm really, really curious about those students who are, and I don't know if it's different in the European arena or Latin America, but those who are already engaged Jewishly or potentially engaged, already have a connection, and they came to October 7th already feeling like they don't want to be at the table because they don't know how to. And what would be your recommendations to help them in their campus space?
Thank you. Who would like to start?
I'll start.
Yeah, please.
I'll choose Lindsay's question because I think, and I'll try to make this answer short, but it's a personal answer also. I'm originally from Moscow, Russia, and the generation of my parents couldn't go to university if you were Jewish. There was like an unspoken quota. No one would actually tell you, but if your name is Abraham, you're failing the exam and you're never getting to university you want to go to. And I know that my father and the generation of our parents, they never changed their names from Michael to Michael, from Baruch to Boris, and so on. And this is the reason why I'm sitting here. And this is the reason why we all are sitting here. Jewish existence, whether on campus or just in the world, is resistance, and it has always been like that. So if we want to continue, be a nation, we have to fight for our right. That's it.
Okay, so thank you everyone. I'll address your question for a tip. I would say 2 tips. First of all, know your stuff. And second of all, choose your way of doing things. And I know it sounds snowflakey and very Gen Z and like very up in the air, but I want to go back to what we spoke about. You need to do it how you want to advocate for Israel. It's unauthentic, and I would even say in that regard, if you don't feel comfortable working with certain groups, just don't. And briefly to this gentleman who asked about whether it's organized or not, yes, definitely. I don't think everything is organized, but definitely organized some of it. I'll just give one brief example. At Colombia, there is a Middle East Institute. Okay, there is a Jewish and Israel Institute because the Middle East Institute didn't want Israel and Jewish studies to be included. And then there's a Palestine Institute. There's no Saudi Arabia Institute, there's no Iraqi, but there's a Palestine Institute. Guess who funds it? I'm not going to say, just Google it, it's all there. And this institute does not teach classes. What they do is that they do events after hours. And they host events with SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine. So you see a tenured professor standing on stage and thanking SJP students for hosting the events with him. And definitely funded, yes. And sorry, Ishar, just one thing, I think, since it's funded, Israel has a lot to do with it. Students can deal with advocacy on campus because they know their campus and they know their peers. Students can't chase the money in international courts, and with the administrations, and that's where the state has more power and an advantage.
Thank you. Professor Liebrandt.
Very. I want to remind you what you know. Colombia was the house for Edouard Said and his Orientalism that had an impact all over the world in the conception of Israel and the defense of the Palestine. And he also had Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi. I met both, I interacted with both, and yeah, there is a gap of age.
Couldn't tell.
You couldn't.
By the way, Said was a good lecturer.
Sorry?
Edward Said was a good lecturer, he was a good presenter.
Excellent.
Yes, excellent.
Excellent. You can enter and see some of his lectures. Now, what I want to say is also that on the general plane of the States and also Latin America, Qatar has been challenging lots of money to this institute. ISGAP, the International, Association for the Study of Anti-Semitism, they just released a month ago the amounts that Qatar channeled to American universities. And most of them couldn't clear their declaration because these were funds that were not officially recognized. Instead of that, what we are seeing is the critiques on the Jewish lobby and the Jewish money that is financing the chairs, right? So here we have a problem really, and it's very important what you said. What would be my answer? I don't think that all the reality of our Jewish life is only developing in the campus. But I focus on that because the campus is the place where our young generations are feeling both the cognitive and the existential menace of anti-Semitism. That's a unique time, because there you are to build knowledge, but you are in a time also that truth is under questioning. You refer to narratives, right? It is, narrative displays also knowledge. But all of us, and I would say I should work with the women that come from Latin American states on the books of Judith Butler, because this is the reading that our youth is exposed to, and we have to deal with that. Second, regarding the national institutions. A more open dialogue should be held. That's very important with different sectors of youth and society. I think it's very important. Third, I think that our two young colleagues are exposing this dilemma. Len, you referred to contradictions, right? I was a student of Eisenstadt. Contradictions, tensions, disjuncture, all this is part of the complexity we are in, and it's very difficult, really. We have to open to it. Well, there are many other points, but I also appreciate this initiative and overall the importance of presenting your research.
Yeah, and we will conclude 2 minutes for Professor Sachs after hearing this panel.
So, thank you, panel. Thank you, panel. It was terrific, but I'm going to offer a slightly different opinion. Number one, I think the cognitive war is not to be fought with students. The cognitive war is to be fought in the intellectual community with the faculty. I think the war to win the minds and hearts of the students has got to be an emotional war or battle. That Amiyut Yehudit, giving Jewish students a sense of their connection with Jews wherever they live. And that's why for me, and I spent yesterday at Taglit, I spent the day before with colleagues at ANU. At Taglit, I said, you need to reframe or at least rethink the program. The key to the program, the secret sauce of Taglit, is the mifgash, the connection with peers. They may be doing something very different. That is what people take away. You're not going to, in 10 days or 10 weeks, give people the cognitive information to fight the war that's going on intellectually on campus. What you can do, by perhaps giving them 3 days of volunteering alongside of Israelim, peers and maybe not peers, they can understand what it is to be part of a society, to be part of this society. And that emotion will hopefully flip the switch that leads them to learn. Toda rabba.
Chaverim, thank you so much for coming this evening. I'd like to thank our distinguished guests on the panel. Thank you, Len Sachs, for being here with us. Toda rabba, and travel safely.